Welcome to Classic Game Room, where you've seen me play Sega Nomad, but have you seen me put the Sega Nomad into a book? It's not nearly as exciting as playing Phantasy Star 2 on the Sega Nomad, but this gives me a chance to just mumble incoherently and talk to someone while I'm doing graphics work. So just sit back and relax and enjoy this video of me basically talking to myself. But I'm not talking to myself because you're listening to me make a book. You ever wonder what goes into making a book? It's a lot of work. So let's check out the Ultramassive Video Game Console Guide Volume 1 in progress. This is coming out on Amazon on July 21st. And it's going to be a massive series of books. The first one covers about 12 to 15 different game systems. I'm still working out the page count, and there'll be a number of other ones from there. Included in the first book are Sega Genesis, Mega Drive, Nomad 32X, all that stuff, Super Nintendo, NES, Atari 2600, Intellivision, Magnavox, Odyssey 2, PlayStation 2, Neo Geo CD, Game Boy, and more. Let's get started. So, here I am inside of Adobe InDesign, and I'm cleaning up the pictures of the Sega Genesis Model 2, as you can see. And I've already done the Model 1. And disregard the text, it has not been proofed or QA'd at this point. And I'll take off the guidelines here so you can see what a page looks like. I have a note here, I'm going to take one more photo. But you can see what a page looks like after all the guides have been knocked off. These pictures have been tweaked, so the backgrounds are pretty much non-existent. I shot these in front of a white backdrop in the studio. I just cleaned up this shot, and now I'm going to clean up this one. This is not the most exciting thing in the world to do, which is why I'm going to just talk to you while I'm doing it. Alright? Here we are, inside Photoshop. Looking at my Model 2 Sega Genesis. I'm going to break this into a PSD in multiple layers. And then go into color correction. So the book is full of high detail shots like this, where you can really make out the styling and the various connections and whatnot. Now I'm going to go even further into depth on the Genesis in its own book. But for this one, it's actually just a broad overview of a lot of game systems. So what I'm doing now is I want to make sure that my colors right next to the Genesis are non-existent. And then I go over here to the other layer. So you can't see, but there's actually two layers here. And that's exactly what I want. I don't want you to know that there's two layers there. So I'm going to save this as a PSD. Okay. And then we're going to go over here to InDesign. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to drop this guy right in there. And as you can see, the background is non-existent. I'll go through a bit later and just make sure everything is lined up on the page the way I want it to be. But I photographed these all from the standpoint of just giving you not only a great looking presentation of each game system, even if it's not a good looking game system. Like I don't find the Genesis Model 2 to be attractive at all, to be honest. It's an abomination compared to the beauty of the Model 1. But I want to show it to you, show you it from every angle, so you can get a nice sense of what it is, and I'll be adding some captions in there as well. But let's move on to... So I've tried to use the sun in as many photos as possible. I mean, it is technically possible for you to go and play Game Boy on the beach. But I took this in Massachusetts over the summer. This one has not been color corrected or anything. And then down here we have a sunset with the Genesis. Can't see it, but that's actually Pittsburgh down there in the distance. So here's one giant two-page spread photograph I took of a bunch of my Genesis games to give a broad overview of the Genesis catalog and the Mega Drive catalog. But for each game system, what I'm trying to do is show it show the game system itself in detail. This book is about the consoles primarily, but also to give a broad overview of what games to start with, which is both entertaining and it's written to be fun, but also helpful for those of you just looking to get into collecting. Like the great thing about the Genesis and the NES and the 2600 and so many of these game systems is that you don't have to spend big bucks to get good games. Especially the Genesis, it's really undervalued, but certainly the Atari and even the NES. I mean, these are popular game systems that have a lot of games, and you can get great games for cheap to start your collection. And I go into that here. Like, what do you want to start with when collecting for the Genesis? I almost always direct people to The Revenge of Shinobi, which is for the most part pretty inexpensive if you find one without the box. Altered Beast, pretty inexpensive, since that was one of the early pack-in games for the Genesis. It may surprise you to learn that I do not recommend collecting Truxton and Musha and Herzog's Wipe first, because none of those games are cheap, because they're all fairly rare. And all the spaceship games are usually overpriced, because people who want those will pay the money for them. So you're not likely to get Musha in your first batch of Genesis games. Unless you stumble across one in the wild, in which case you are lucky. If somebody's selling it and they don't know what they have. Not much of a difference, but that's going to look spectacular on the page. Alright, and I'm going to want to increase the size of that, but we'll do that in a moment here. Let's see, what do I recommend for the Genesis? So disregard the writing here, this is still a really rough layout. But as an example, the games I recommend collecting for the Genesis, just like a starter collection. Like you're going to go out and just buy a couple games, pick up a Sega Genesis, whichever model suits your budget, whichever one you find most appealing. And I go into detail on that earlier, but you know, Revenge of Shinobi. It's obviously Sonic the Hedgehog. I love the first one. It's cheap too, because it was a pack-in game. Thunder Force 2, not really inexpensive, but if you can find one without the box, it's actually a pretty good buy, and it's one of the better spaceship games. Super Hang-On, love Super Hang-On. NHL 91, I mean really any of the sports games are cheap, but NHL 91 is a great example. And the early EA hockey games are just dynamite. Altered Beast. Here's one of my all-time favorite Sega things, the Nomad. Just cleaned up the photo here, 3/4 shot of the back of it. I love the Sega imprinted on the battery pack, and I think that's some sand stuck in the crevice there from when I had it is from when I had this on the beach. I'll leave it there. It's a sign that it's been traveling, which is what you do with the Nomad. And disregard the writing once again. Not complete, but I'm going to drop the touched up photo in there. I'll align everything later, but here's one of the beach shots. Took that with a 300mm lens. That looks pretty cool actually, I think. Little Vector Man 2 in there, and look what I have here. My Sega Nomad. And there's me and my camera. Playing some Phantasy Star 2, of course. The Nomad is the perfect game system for Phantasy Star 2. It's a long game, you can just hang out, lay in bed or whatever, and kill things in Phantasy Star 2. It's a great game. Alright. Now I have to touch up these photos, and we'll dive in here with this one first. And again, really excited about the launch of this one, the first book in my ultra-massive series, which will be an ultra-massive series of potentially up to 100 books eventually. Since I'm doing a broad overview of every game system and then digging into each game system for their own books and covering spaceship shooters and driving games individually. So it'll be a lot of fun. I really enjoy writing and obviously the graphics and assembly and the photography and the assembly work. So it's a joy to do this stuff. Except for the photo editing part of it. That I could do without, but if you want it done right, looks good. Didn't comb my hair yet, so just disregard that. Here are some other photos from the Ultramassive Video Game Console Guide. Haven't cleaned these up yet, but my 2600 Junior, got the Sears Telegames, doing some photo work with that case, the armored Atari case. Haven't done that yet. This shot turned out nice. Did a lot of outdoor photography work, and here's some of the original spreads. Backtracks, 3D Imager. Also, the 2600 is tough to shoot because the stainless steel strip of power combined with the black on the 2600 frequently throws off the camera. So you can't shoot it too bright with risk of blowing it out, but you can't go too dark either. So, see what I can do here. I'm going to go levels. This one's going to require some finagling. That's a weird brightness graph there. So let's see, we're going to crush those blacks down a bit. I've done a first pass on 2600 Junior here. Let's drop it in. It's not bad. You can see I tried to photograph this from a few different angles. Show you the side of it. The back's not terribly exciting, so I actually put in Video Pinball, which has just wonderful artwork. And then a shot of the actual game cartridge in there, and as you can see, I think I got my head in the shadow, thankfully not in the actual game system. So I'll chop all that out. Let's do that one next. Do one more here before I take a break. I went in by hand and cleaned up this one bit of shadow I didn't like. This doesn't bother me because that's the actual real shadow, but that'll look fine on the page. But the shot of my head leaning in, that had to go. My big fat head. Alright, let's drop this thing into InDesign. Kerchunk. There we go. Thank you for watching. The Ultramassive Video Game Console Guide is kicking off my Ultramassive series. This comes out July 21st, 2017 on Amazon.com, on Kindle, and in print. So depending on when you watch this video, it may already be available. Maybe it's available for pre-order on Kindle, and then it goes to print, and it will still be available even as we're fighting robots and brain people in 2084. Hopefully. As always, thank you for watching. Classic Game Room is on Patreon. Classic Game Room barware is at classicgameroom.com. And my books, Surf Panda, Jesus the Coked Up Chicken #2, and Retro Megatrex are on Amazon.com.